You're listening to A New Light by Jason Hamilton, narrated by Henry Kramer. Part 1. Gabriel wasn't particularly fond of the royal family, but he did love a good party. Today was Queen Telma's 18th birthday, and it was also the day of her coronation. For several years now, after the death of her parents, the kingdom had lain in the hands of a steward until such time as the queen came of age. Gabriel sipped on his share of the wine, handed out to everyone in the city, even the beggars. The crown must have spent a fortune on this. Still, it was a good move on Telma's part to start her reign with a gesture of welcome to her realm that did not exclude anyone based on class. He stood in what was normally used as the market square, though all the vendors were clear of the place, making room for the enormous crowd that flocked to the area, waiting to get a glimpse of the queen, though more likely just here for the wine. Gabriel was eager to see the queen himself. He knew little about her, as he never really took much interest in politics. His focus was on other things, like learning more about what happened beyond their borders. That was a far more interesting topic. He hadn't even been in Skycliff for many years, but now with his new role as a full professor at the College of Skycliff, he felt it fitting to at least know what was going on in the city. Besides, everyone was here. It seemed the square must be packed to overflowing. He glanced among the crowd. There were people of all shapes and sizes surrounding him. Beggars, merchants, nobility, not to mention the watchers. He saw several of them scattered throughout the crowd, likely to keep the peace should the need arise. His eyes landed on one in particular, a young man, a few years younger than Gabriel, with golden blonde hair and a handsome demeanor. It was good to see men like him defending the city. There were unfortunate dangers that awaited the careless outside their gates. Gabriel knew all too well what kind of monsters one could encounter out in the wild. Soldiers like that young man were what provided peace of mind for the people in cities like Skycliff. Gabriel's eyes turned back to the crowd. It wasn't often that such an event could bring people from all walks of life together like this. Only the very elite, members of the royal family, their friends, and those of the clergy were allowed to attend the actual coronation. The rest had to stay here, rich and poor. Perhaps the queen could provide a stable foundation on which to build unity between them. To his left, he noticed a small group of foreigners watching as well, about a half-dozen of them. They were clearly from the eastern reaches, with their slanted eyes and slightly different hue to their skin. Gabriel had heard that the steward had been reaching out across the ocean to establish stronger trade between their two countries. Perhaps these were some kind of ambassadors sent to observe the queen's coronation. He thought it odd that they had to remain with the crowd like everyone else. But it was true that very few attended the ceremony, and he saw no reason why visiting foreign dignitaries would be exempt. Though he wondered, if anyone from those eastern lands was visiting Skycliff, why hadn't he been summoned to act as a liaison of sorts? Everyone at the college knew that he was well-traveled. He had even been to those eastern lands at one point. They were a much simpler people, in the sense that they didn't appreciate elaborate clothing or tall, majestic buildings. But you couldn't let that fool you. They were highly intelligent and educated in all manner of disciplines. They valued knowledge above all else, including military might or prestige. Perhaps Gabriel would inquire of the queen in the future, offering his services as a consultant. Suddenly, the crowd roared. Gabriel turned to see that the doors to the royal palace had opened far above them, and there stood Telma, arrayed in a lavish red gown that fanned around her. She was surrounded by her family and members of the clergy, but very few guards that Gabriel could see. Most of them were among the crowd. Relics, but she was an impressive sight in those ceremonial robes. The Queen proceeded down the winding path that led to the market square where Gabriel and the crowd stood waiting. It looked like she was coming to speak to the rest of them, Gabriel noted with some satisfaction. It wasn't necessarily a tradition to do so, but it supported the idea that she cared for all people, from any class. It would be a very important speech. Out of the corner of his eyes, he caught movement. Turning his head, he saw the foreigners slowly pushing their way forward. Not fast, but enough that people made room for them. Well, that wasn't unusual. Everyone was pushing forward to get a better look at the Queen. They probably just wanted a good vantage point. The Queen continued her descent and wasn't far from them now. The crowd was held back by a wooden barrier erected for such an occasion, though it was little more than a crude fence. Gabriel allowed himself to move with the crowd, as people pressed in as much as they could, nearly breaking the barrier in their eagerness. A pair of watchers, including the blonde one Gabriel had seen earlier, placed themselves on the other side of the barrier, reminding everyone to stay on their side. The Eastern men were pushing their way to the front. Rather eager, weren't they? "People of Skycliff," one of the clergy spoke now that the Queen was closer. The crowd grew silent amazingly fast. "I present to you Queen Telma Lomelin, first of her name, wearer of the crown of relics, and defender of the downtrodden." That last one was a new title. Yes, perhaps she was going to be the force that cemented divides between the people. One could hope, at least. Those foreigners were far ahead of Gabriel now, closing in on the barrier that stood between them and the Queen. One of them pulled something from his pouch, and it gleamed in the afternoon sun. Gabriel blinked and squinted. No. Was that a weapon? He pushed himself forward, forcing the people in front of him to give way. Yes, that man was definitely carrying a knife. "Stop them!" Gabriel yelled. All heads turned to face him. "He has a knife!" The foreigners didn't look back to see who had shouted. Instead, they launched themselves forward, pushing aside those that remained, though many of them could now see the threat and quickly jumped out of harm's way. Screams echoed around the market square, and the Queen, together with her clergy, began falling back up the winding path. Gabriel was still pushing forward as fast as he could, but there was no way he'd reach them in time. They were already running at the Queen faster than Gabriel thought possible. They must have had a strength brand to move that fast, or perhaps grace. Suddenly, the golden blonde watcher was there, cutting off the assassins. He stretched forth a hand, and an invisible force wrapped itself around all half-dozen foreigners. The watcher was a telekinetic. There weren't too many telekinetics around, as it involved a much longer apprenticeship, and there weren't too many gifters who felt comfortable performing the complicated brand. But heavens, it was useful. Each of the assassins stopped dead in their tracks, but that didn't last for long. Straining against his restraints, one of the assassins broke free, and the watcher stumbled back. Yes, those assassins must have strength. That was the only way to break the hold of a telekinetic. Gabriel was over the barrier now, not entirely sure what he was going to do, but sure that he was going to help whatever happened. Other watchers were closing in on the assassins, but one managed to break past their defenses, just as Gabriel caught up to him. Gabriel threw himself at the man as he began to once again chase down the Queen. Gabriel hit the ground hard, but caught the assassin's foot with his hands. The man tripped and tumbled, rolling as he did so and twisting to face his new foe. He rose to his feet with surprising agility and gave Gabriel a quick kick to the chest. Gabriel's breath left him in a rush, and he flew backward about 10 feet. The man had a strength brand. Why had he attacked a man with a strength brand? He hit the ground hard and nearly blacked out. His chest hurt worse than any pain he had ever experienced. Grimacing through the pain, he realized he must have several broken ribs. Trying to rise, he collapsed back on the ground. No, there was no way he could move like this. Yet his heroics, however short-sighted, had been just what they needed. The golden-haired watcher slammed his spear, point first, into the distracted assassin's neck. The man gasped and choked. Strength could protect against telekinesis, but it wouldn't do much about a spear. He toppled over, blood trailing down the path. Gabriel let his head rest on the stone. The queen was safe, at least, though his chest was on fire. Did he even have any ribs left? Surely that man had fractured them all. Gabriel didn't look up, but he couldn't hear any more noise from the fight. They must have taken care of the remaining assassins as well. "Go to the queen!" one of the watchers screamed, their commander. "Protect the queen!" They all ran up the path, leading Gabriel and the assassins lying in the stone path. This wasn't good. Gabriel felt a stab of panic. There was no way he could move in his condition. He needed a healer. A face appeared above him, blocking out the light. It was the golden blonde watcher. He had stayed behind. "You're hurt," he said. "I'll get you some help." He left, and a few moments later appeared with a woman who must have been in the crowd somewhere to have come so fast. She knelt next to Gabriel and began gently touching his chest. Her hand bore the brand of a healer. He winced at her touch. "Will he be all right?" asked the watcher. "He's got several broken ribs. I can feel the worst of it, but it will take some time for this to fully recover." Her brand activated, and Gabriel felt a tingling sensation that flooded through his whole body. He breathed in, feeling far less pain than before, though it still hurt. Relics. It still hurt a lot. He knew that healers needed time to heal the most serious wounds, but he hoped it wouldn't take that long. "I have a place not far from here," said the healer, "at the crossroads of Main and Relic-bound Street. Get him there for me, and I can do more." The watcher nodded. "I will." The healer left, likely to prepare. The watcher offered a hand to Gabriel, who winced as he rose to his feet, clutching at his chest. "Remind me never to take a strength brand in unarmed combat again." The watcher laughed and reached out to hold Gabriel steady. "What you did was foolish, but brave. You may have just saved the queen's life." They began walking back down the path, albeit very slowly. "My name is Rael," said the watcher after enough time had passed. "I see you're a gifter. Do you work at the college?" "I do. Gabriel is my name. And thank you for what you're doing. I couldn't help but notice that you didn't stay with the others to protect the queen." Rael shrugged. "I'll probably hear about it later, but that wasn't my direct commanding officer anyway. I'm part of a traveling patrol, and we're only here temporarily. We leave tomorrow for Foothold." "Ah, the Quiet Stone Fortress. You've been there?" "Once before, though not for very long." The watcher was silent for a time. "You don't by chance know anyone by the name of Carlona, do you?" Gabriel frowned as he walked. The name did strike a bell. Wasn't she a gifter? Specialized in alchemy, I believe. "Yes, that's her." The young man looked hopeful. "I know of her, but we've never met in person." "Ah, well, it was worth a shot," he said, putting his attention back on the road in front of him. "She left with an expedition into the Hollow Peaks not too long ago." "What is your relationship to her?" "She's my wife." Ah, so that explained why he looked so worried for her. "And you haven't seen her since she left?" Gabriel asked. "No, but Foothold is 3 weeks' journey from here, and who knows how long they planned to spend in the Hollow Peaks. Perhaps she'll be in the fortress by the time I get there." "Perhaps so." Gabriel winced as he stumbled on a loose cobblestone and pain shot through his chest again. "Again, thank you for helping me today." "It was my pleasure." Rael led Gabriel to a small home deeper in the city. The healer was already waiting there, and she brought Gabriel to a room with a spare bed. The air smelled of incense, and she was boiling something over the hearth. Once Rael helped set Gabriel in the bed, he left the room, and Gabriel could hear him talking with the healer outside, though he couldn't make out much of what was said. The healer came back in a few moments later, carrying a tray filled with various herbs, a damp cloth, and a cup of steaming liquid. "Here, take this," she said, holding out the cup. "It will help with the pain and increase your strength." Gabriel obeyed and was surprised at the sweetness of the broth, though it wasn't a flavor he was used to. "Thank you," he said, resting his head back on the pillow. "Your watcher friend has already agreed to pay my fee," said the healer, taking the damp cloth and pressing it against Gabriel's forehead. "He must care for you." "We only just met." The healer's eyebrows shot up. "That is surprising. Well, I'd stay in touch with that one if I were you. He obviously has a good heart." Gabriel agreed. Who was that man to pay a healer like that? Someone he had never met. Healers weren't cheap, though Gabriel could have paid the woman himself. He hadn't needed the assistance, but was grateful for it anyway. The healer used her magic on him twice more, pausing between each attempt to eat something and regain her strength. Between that and the herbs and broth she gave him, it wasn't long before Gabriel was breathing easily, his chest feeling completely healed. "I think that will do it for you," said the healer, though she looked quite haggard herself. Healing could take a lot out of a person. It was why they usually charged such high fees. "If you want, you can rest here for the night, but you could also leave if you want." "I appreciate the hospitality," said Gabriel, "but I feel well enough to—" A knock sounded on the door. The healer looked puzzled but scurried into the other room to see who it was. Gabriel rose from his bed and followed her. Perhaps Rael had returned? He very much wanted to thank the Watcher for what he had done, and perhaps repay him. Surely a Watcher needed the coin more than he did. But it was not the Watcher at the door. A tall man stood there in overly lavish garments meant for the high nobility. Probably someone who worked with the Queen. "Ah, there he is," said the man with a smile as he saw Gabriel. "The healer tells me that you're capable of moving about." "I feel well enough, thank you," said Gabriel. "What's this about?" "The Queen would like an audience with you," said the tall man. "She wishes to thank you for your help in defeating her would-be assassins." "I just raised the alarm," said Gabriel. "I'm sure anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't, and you did. And all the same, the Queen would see you today." The healer glanced at Gabriel, then retreated back to her hearth. This didn't concern her. And besides, Gabriel couldn't resist an order from the Queen. So he nodded at the emissary and followed him out the door where a gilded carriage awaited them. The carriage ride was bumpy and uncomfortable, though that was partly because Gabriel could still feel a small amount of pain in his chest. The broken ribs were mended, but he was pretty sure he'd still have some bruising there. The tall man sat across from him, but said nothing more as their driver led them up the winding pathway to where the royal palace and cathedral stood on the highest outcropping in Skycliff. Gabriel climbed out of the carriage once they reached the top and got a good look at the land below. From up here, you could see the entire wall that surrounded the large city and the farmland that stretched beyond, not to mention the ocean on one side. "If you would follow me, sir," said the tall man. Gabriel did so, taking note of the large, spacious hallways the man took him through. There was so much wealth tied up in a place like this. He could only hope that the Queen used it for good. The steward had been all right before now, but Gabriel knew his history, and not all monarchs ruled in fairness. The very stones of this place had been built with slave labor, though that was a long time ago, and slavery had since been outlawed. But who knew what Talma would bring to the table? The uncertainty both frightened Gabriel and excited him. They most certainly lived in a time of change. The tall man brought him to some large, heavily carved oak doors. To Gabriel's surprise, he found Rael standing there, waiting. The watcher's eyebrows lifted in surprise at seeing Gabriel there. "Rael," Gabriel said, crossing the distance and clasping his newfound friend by the hand. "I'm surprised to see you here." "Likewise," said Rael, returning the handshake. "How do you feel?" "Much better, thanks to you. I can repay you for your help." Rael waved a hand. "Not at all. It was my pleasure." "But surely you need it more than I do." "Watchers are not underpaid," said Rael, "and besides—" But he cut off as the tall man cleared his throat. "If the gentleman could please refrain from conversation, the Queen will see you both now." Rael and Gabriel glanced at each other but nodded, saying nothing. The tall man returned their nod and sprung one of the large iron latches on the door, then heaved it to swing forward. Both Rael and Gabriel entered the room. The audience chamber was far larger than even Gabriel expected, and he'd seen a lot in his travels. There didn't seem to be a corner anywhere that wasn't decorated, though the architecture itself held a majestic simplicity that Gabriel could appreciate. The Queen sat on the throne, which was perched on a raised platform at the opposite end of the room. Both Rael and Gabriel approached, noticing only then how much ceremony they were probably skipping. They hadn't changed into more appropriate dress robes, the tall man hadn't announced them, and there was no one else surrounding the Queen. It appeared to be a rather informal meeting. The Queen rose from the throne as they approached. "There they are, my two heroes." She smiled at them both. "Thank you, my lady," said Rael, "but begging your pardon, my companions among the watchers deserve the same praise." "I have already met with them and expressed my gratitude," said the Queen. "I understand you helped this gentleman rather than rush to my side." "He was in need of medical attention, my lady," Rael said, standing resolute as he faced the Queen. "I felt it prudent to see to his needs, and confident my companions could protect you after we eliminated the primary threat. I will submit myself for disciplinary action if my judgments were in error." "What? No, that wasn't right. If it weren't for Rael—" "No need," said the Queen. "Your commander was not exactly thrilled, but upon learning of your situation and the role you played in stopping my attackers, I convinced him to exclude punishment." "Thank you, my lady," said Rael, bowing slightly. "And as for you—" The Queen turned to face Gabriel. "I understand it was you who raised the alarm about the foreign assassins." "It was, my lady," said Gabriel, copying the honorific Rael had used. "I merely saw one of them moving towards your position with a dagger. I did what anyone would have." "Unfortunately, not what everyone would have," said the Queen, sighing. "Regardless, you have my thanks. I owe you both my life." She met Gabriel's eyes. "I understand you're a professor at the College of Skycliff. Tell me, what do you know about these foreigners?
It seems strange to me that they would act so rashly against me, when my steward has been trying to establish friendly relations with them for quite some time."
"I can only assume that they must be part of some fringe group, my lady," said Gabriel. "I don't see this as a government attack."
"And why not?"
"Because it doesn't fit their culture. I've traveled to the East and have met many among their people. They are largely peaceful, and I find it very unlikely that any but their extremists would wish you harm."
"And yet, only those who were well placed within their government would have any reason to care about me and our kingdom."
Gabriel hesitated. "That is true, my lady, but I ask you not to take this attack as a representation of their people." The Queen frowned.
"Well, perhaps not. But we will have to be more careful who we allow in our cities from now on. We cannot afford to have another attack like today. Thankfully, no one was permanently hurt or killed in this attack, but there could be more."
Gabriel didn't like the idea of restricting access to foreigners. He himself had been a foreigner in other lands on several occasions, and found that the most hospitable nations and tribes were by far the safest. But he supposed the Queen was right to be cautious. "If I may, Your Majesty," Rael spoke up, "perhaps it would be prudent to reach out to these Eastern people and show them we hold no ill will. Perhaps a show of forgiveness will convince them that we hold their best interests at heart." Gale nodded.
"That does sound like a good idea, my lady. Do the two of you suddenly think yourselves my advisors?"
The Queen pursed her lips, though Gabriel thought he saw a hint of amusement there.
"I already have plans on how to deal with the Eastern nations. Worry not, I won't overreact, but I must show a firm hand now that I'm queen."
Rael inclined his head. "Of course." He didn't use the honorific this time. The Queen pursed her lips again.
"And that firm hand extends to both of you as well. Don't you forget it. For your help today, I plan to see you both handsomely rewarded. The Lord Chamberlain will provide you with a pouch of coin on your way out, and you will have access to some of the amenities of the palace should you desire, as long as I am not using them myself."
She smiled at them both.
"The royal bathhouses are quite enjoyable."
A sack of coin and access to bathhouses? Gabriel hadn't expected any kind of reward, but these did seem like odd ones, to say the least. Gabriel shrugged inwardly. Well, what had he expected? To be raised to nobility? It was honestly surprising that they were receiving this much.
"Thank you, my lady,"
said Gabriel, bowing again. Rael followed suit.
"You may go,"
said the Queen with a wave of her hand. Rael did an about-face and strode towards the giant oak doors. Gabriel turns to follow.
"And Professor,"
the Queen said. Gabriel turned back to look at her.
"I may require your knowledge of the Eastern realms in the future. I trust you will be accommodating?"
Of course, my lady," he said, then turned to leave once again. He honestly wasn't sure he felt comfortable sharing such information with the Queen anymore. Something about this meeting told him that she wouldn't use all of that knowledge for good. But it was just a gut feeling. Hopefully, he just imagined it. Gabriel joined Rael outside the royal house and accepted his coin pouch from the tall man who must have been the Lord Chamberlain the Queen referred to. Rael was holding his own pouch before him, as if contemplating whether to keep it. Well, at least this way he was compensated for Gabriel's medical expenses. They began walking towards the exit to the palace.
"You don't look too pleased,"
said Gabriel to Rael, once they were out of earshot of the Lord Chamberlain. Rael shrugged. "Just apprehension, I guess. If there's ever a war in the East, we'll be the first to fight."
"You're worried that you and your Watcher friends will die? Is that not a danger of signing up with the Watchers?"
"That's a danger for every soldier. No, I'm worried for the safety of those we fight." Gabriel let that sink in. The Watchers were exceptional warriors, and usually possessing some of the best brands. From what Gabriel knew of the eastern reaches, the Watchers could wreak havoc. But it surprised him that a man like Rael would care so much for his potential enemies. "I'm sure it will not come to that," he said, trying to improve the mood. Perhaps not," said Rael, but he still looked troubled. They exited the palace and found themselves overlooking the city and the lands to the west. "I hope your travels to Foothold fare well," said Gabriel, "and that you have a joyous reunion with your wife." "I appreciate that," said Rael. "Perhaps, the next time we're in Skycliff, we can have supper together. The two of you can talk of scholarly things." Gabriel smiled. "I think I'd like that very much." The new friends proceeded down the pathway, their visit with the Queen all but forgotten.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Hamilton. I'm the author of the book that you're listening to right now. It'll get right back into it in just a second, but I wanted to invite you to a special VIP club. I call it the Knights of the Round Table, the modern Knights of the Round Table, if you will, where you can come in and interact directly with me on a weekly basis. It's a very small fee. At this point, it will be going up in the very near future, but this group essentially will allow you to get all of my books for free when you sign up. So you'll get all of my ebooks and you'll get all of the audiobooks that I've produced so far. There's a couple of other goodies available in there if you want to check that out. So I would strongly recommend you check out the group. Come and join an amazing community all about this whole fantasy world that I've created here. I hope you enjoy it and check it out. The link's below.
Part 2. Warning. This contains spoilers for Out of Shadow, Roots of Creation, Book 1. Rael stared into the wintry darkness of night. Clouds covered the moon, making it difficult to see anything. It was his turn to keep the night watch, while the rest of his fellow Watchers slept peacefully. Privately, he enjoyed standing watch. It was a quiet time for him to calm his mind and think through the coming day. But he hated the reasons that made night watches necessary. He sat on a large rock and groaned, planting his spear in the snowy ground next to him. It had been several weeks, months even, since they left Skycliff, and they were in the foothills of the Hollow Peaks, patrolling the area near Foothold. The mountain pass wasn't far, and that would lead them south into the mountains. He'd hoped to find his wife waiting for him at Foothold, but word had come that they were still in the mountains somewhere, and hadn't been seen long after they were scheduled to arrive. That was the main reason they were here, to enter the mountains and find the lost group of scholars. The area was filled with caves, which gave the Hollow Peaks their name. Honestly, the chances of finding the scholars were slim. But Rael was determined to look through every hole in every mountain if he had to. He would find his wife even if he had to leave the Watchers and search on his own to do it. Rael tensed as he heard footsteps crunch through the snow. He tightened his grip on the spear, but soon relaxed. It was Culdain, one of Rael's better friends in the band, a junior officer, and Rael's relief for the evening. "Ho there, Rael," said Culdain as he drew closer. "How goes the watch?" "Quiet," Rael answered. "Just how I like it." "I don't doubt it. How are you holding up?" "I'll be fine." Culdain chuckled and stared at the ground. "I don't know how you do it, Rael. If it were my wife, I'd be out of my mind with worry." "You don't have a wife." "Yeah, well, if she's anything like I imagine." Rael cracked a grin for the first time that evening. If she's everything you imagine, she'd probably have no interest in a man like you. Culdain stood silent for a moment. Then both of them laughed. A slow laugh that started small, but soon both of them were clutching their sides. "Oh, Rael, Stop. Go on and get some rest now. The world doesn't need more of your mirth.
The world doesn't get enough of it, I'll wager. When they both quieted, Culdain reached out and placed a hand on Rael's shoulder.
We'll find her, Rael. Have heart. It will all work out.
Rael nodded, grateful for the support. His beloved Carlona was a gifter, particularly knowledgeable in the study of alchemy, the branding of physical objects. She had left several months ago with the expedition. They had been scheduled to return a few weeks ago. So far, none of them had been seen again. And so it was the Watcher's job to seek them out. Rael and his band belonged to the Foothold Garrison, not the most exciting outpost to be assigned to, but often a training ground for young officers. Rael hoped to be one of those someday. Assuming he could find his wife, that is. He wouldn't leave until he found her again. A crashing through the underbrush brought Rael and Culdain out of their thoughts. They both froze, and their armor creaked as weapons were brought to bear. A noise came through the dark snow-covered trees, a sound of feet crunching through snow. Was another of the Watchers awake at this hour? Rael glanced at Culdain and waved his hand in the direction of the noise. Culdain nodded, and they both began to walk in that direction, spreading out as they did so. The crunching sound stopped, and so did the two soldiers. They kept their ears turned, trying to locate the sound again. Suddenly, a shape hurtled out of the darkness, launching itself at Culdain. It was a demon. Even in the moonlight, Rael could make out its gray skin glistening with sweat despite the cold. Its long fingers and teeth gleamed in the night. The force of the creature knocked Culdain to the ground, and the beast persisted, gnashing its teeth at Culdain, who held it back with one arm. Rael activated his brand. A crisscross of lines on the back of his left hand began to glow like white-hot metal in a blacksmith's foundry. The lines almost looked like a bird in flight, the symbol of a telekinetic. The demon rose off of Culdain, hanging in the air. It looked confused, still swinging its arms at the soldier, but unable to reach him. Using his brand, Culdain set the creature down on the ground, pinning it there while Culdain rose to his feet.
Well, I'm awake now,
Culdain said, brushing the snow off his armor. The demon kept wailing and thrashing, but Rael's telekinetic force kept it in place. He barely had to lift a finger, and already the demon was at his mercy. Telekinesis was a powerful gift, one Rael did not take lightly. Rael ran through what he knew of demons. He knew they were beginning to roam the land in far greater numbers than before, which was why they kept night watches. Not long ago, the demons were oddities, tragic results of poorly used magic. But most were a mistake, a sad error from inexperienced gifters. But now, all evidence pointed to rogue gifters intentionally creating them. Rael still could not fathom the reason why anyone would wish to do such a thing, but they were increasing almost exponentially. Scholars in Skycliff were beginning to wonder if demons were breeding, something most had assumed impossible. Rael didn't like that idea either, but at least it was preferable to the possibility of gifters intentionally creating demons. Rael pitied them, even though he had never actually seen a demon with his own eyes until this moment. The creature in front of him matched the stories, almost too well. "Why didn't you use your blood burning on it?" Rael asked Culdain. His friend was one of the only Watchers authorized to wear a blood burner brand. It allowed the bearer to instantly burn someone from the inside out if he made contact with the skin. Culdain had received his because of his close connections with Queen Telma's family. Rael didn't approve of the brand, but he wondered why Culdain had failed to use it while being in such close contact with the demon.
I knew you had it under control. Besides, I think we could learn more with it captured than dead.
Rael agreed.
He had never seen a demon up close. Do you think there are more of them? Maybe, but from what I've heard, these demons tend to roam free, not in packs. At least for now. We know so very little about them. Look at the brands on its arm. Rael did so, and noted the demon's multiple brands. A human could only sustain one brand and keep their sanity. Most died if receiving 2 brands, but the rest became demons. Looks like this one was a gifter before he turned, Kaldane said. I wonder if he tried to give himself the 2nd brand. Looks like strength to me. Perhaps the man wanted more than just his ability to give brands. Quite selfish of him. The poor wretch, Rael said, keeping his eyes on the beast. He still kept his brand active, forcing the demon to the ground. It's hard to believe these beasts were once human. Not for me. They still are human, just broken. Their heads whipped around as another watcher approached from the camp, probably wondering what all the noise was about. The darkness made it hard to make the man out, but the figure must have known what the demon was, for he turned around and bolted back toward the camp. Rael sighed. Zephyrin, their leader, would hear of this now and come running. Kaldane realized the same thing and spoke. I suppose we should kill it. The colonel won't want to keep it alive. Rael hesitated. He knew that Kaldane was right. Knowing their leader, Zephyrin would never tolerate a live demon. The misuse of magic in any form was something the colonel spoke passionately against. He simply stood there, lost in indecision. He didn't think he could bring himself to kill these creatures, even when they were so far gone as this. Not when they were helpless. Kaldane also stood motionless, but his eyes were fastened on the demon, watching it writhe. He seemed almost curious, like he was trying to take in everything he could about the demon before the colonel arrived and ordered its execution. Rael pitied it. Whatever happened, it would not end well for this fallen human. Footsteps running in the snow announced the arrival of Colonel Zephyrin, their commander. He was accompanied by several others in the band. The colonel glanced from the demon, to Rael, who kept it in place with his magic, to Kaldane, who stood to one side, a mildly interested expression on his face. Well done, soldier, Zephyrin said to Rael, for containing the threat. Now, would either of you care to tell me why it isn't dead yet? Rael opened his mouth to speak, but Kaldane beat him to it. We thought we might learn something by keeping it alive. And have you? Kaldane paused, his mouth still open. No, sir, not yet. Nothing more than what we already know. That's what I thought, Zephyrin said, his voice sharper than before. We have no use for it. Kill it immediately. Sir, these creatures used to be human, Rael cut in. He barely noticed Kaldane shaking his head at him. Do we really have a right to murder them like this? Zephyrin stared at him like he had gone mad. Whatever humanity these creatures possessed, they lost when they chose to dabble in magic they should never have sought out. We don't know that it was his choice, sir. If a rogue gifter were to— You think that matters? That, he pointed at the snarling demon, is not human. Not anymore. We're doing it a favor by putting it out of its misery. Now are you going to obey my orders, or do I have to court-martial you? Rael's head bowed. There was no way out of this. No, sir, he said finally. He turned to look at Kaldane, who nodded in understanding. Stepping towards the demon, Kaldane reached out one hand. The demon's eyes widened, and it tried to snap at the hand, but Rael held it back with his magic. As Kaldane's hand touched the creature's head, it let out a soft whine. Then all movement ceased. Culdain bit his lip. At least Culdain had made the execution swift. "That's more like it," said Colonel Zephyrin. "Now, since you've managed to wake nearly the entire band, we're going to make an early start today." A few groans came from some of the nearby watchers. Not Rail. As long as his wife was out there, he wouldn't rest until he found her. An early start only meant more time to do so. "And you two," Zephyrin addressed Rail and Culdain. "I don't want this to happen again. If you see another demon, your orders are to kill it immediately. Who knows how many lives you will save in doing so?" "Yes, sir," Culdain snapped a salute. Rail hesitated, but nodded reluctantly and also saluted. That must have been enough for Zephyrin, as he turned back to the camp without another word, leaving Rail and Culdain behind. "Well, I suppose that's what we should have expected," Culdain said as they watched their commander disappear behind some trees. "We did expect it," Rail said, "but that doesn't make it right." "Who said anything about being right? We don't have that luxury." Rail silently agreed with his friend, but he still didn't like it. One day, he hoped to make some changes among the Watchers. He would make it happen. They each returned to the rest of the band. Most of the Watchers were already awake and breaking camp. Rail and Culdain helped with the final preparations, but it was only minutes before they were off again. They moved in a horizontal line, rather than single file, in hopes that one of the Watchers might see something relevant. It made climbing the mountain much harder, as some of the passes were quite narrow, so their progress was slow. Rail didn't mind. The last thing he wanted was to pass by any evidence that could lead to his wife and her group of scholars. Culdain walked alongside him, though they continued in silence for a long time. That encounter with the demon had an effect on both of them, though Rail suspected that Culdain was more curious about the demons rather than compassionate towards them. Culdain was Rail's friend, but he was also the colder, more calculating of the two. Something did not seem right to Rail. An unease filled him. Was it the demon? Was it the reaction of his commanding officer? After walking another 100 yards or so, he finally realized it had nothing to do with those things at all. There were no animal sounds around them. Everything was silent. No birds or insects. Nothing. "Culdain," he said, noting how loud his voice seemed. "Have you noticed?" "It's quiet." Culdain nodded his head. "Something isn't right." "Keep your guard up," Rail said, tightening his grip on his spear, ready to use it at any moment. Not long after, they came to a small clearing. Tall pines lined the mountains on either side, but they were nearing the top pass, the one that crested the mountains and led deeper into the hollow peaks. It was a good place to set up camp, and Rail began looking closer for any sign that his wife and the expedition had come through here. They almost certainly would have. Yet the sounds of nature around him, or the lack thereof, made him all the more uncomfortable. Even the wind had died. All he could hear was the creak of metal and leather from the Watchers as they marched around him. Then he saw it. A black figure appeared at the crest of the clearing. It stood, motionless, but there was no denying it, even at this distance. The figure was not a normal human. Something was wrong about it. It seemed to suck all the light out of the air around it, all save for its eyes. Its eyes glowed green. Zephyrin called an order, and everyone hurried to form a defensive position. Rail obeyed automatically, but Culdain almost didn't respond at first. His eyes squinted at the newcomer. "You've prepared for this," Zephyrin shouted at his men. "Remember that demons are no match for a trained soldier. You have every advantage." But the soldiers muttered, and some even took a few steps back as more dark shapes joined the first. The hillside across from them was covered with maybe 24 of the newcomers. Zephyrin turned to see the reinforcements. He cursed and unsheathed his sword, readying for a fight. Why weren't these demons attacking? It was hard to tell at this distance, but Rael began to wonder if these dark figures were not demons, at least not of the sort he had seen this morning. That had been a feral animal by comparison, on all fours and attacking without hesitation. These figures stood their ground, and Rael thought he could see clothing and bags that they carried. Then, unexpectedly, he saw one of them turn to the others. Rael heard voices. These beings were speaking to each other. "Hold!" he yelled. "Do not attack!" "What is the meaning of this, soldier?" Zephyrin was looking at Rael with incredulity. "Sir, no disrespect, sir, but I don't think those are demons." "Look at them, Sergeant. They're clearly not human. Look at those eyes." "They're also not attacking. The demon I saw this morning could do nothing but attack. It was a predator, and it looks to me that these people, whoever they are, can—" "Well met, Watchers," a voice called out. It was one of the dark shapes. Shocked murmurs spread among the soldiers. Even Zephyrin seemed taken aback, for he said nothing in response. He only stared at the figures, an unreadable expression on his face. Since no one said anything, Rael decided to do so. "Hello there," he began. "Forgive our reactions. We didn't know anyone was here." "We understand. Our appearance takes some getting used to." "Pardon my intrusion, but could you explain that part, please? It might go a long way to ease the minds of everyone here." "It's a long story, but we are not demons. We are part of an expedition that came this way to search for a pillar of eternity." More murmurs ran through the crowd, and this time Rael did not blame them. Did he dare hope? Could it be the group they were searching for? "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "We were sent to find that expedition. How is it that you appear as you do?" The beings had wandered closer now, and Rael could better make out the man he was speaking to. His entire appearance, even the air around him, was darker than coal. His hair was cut short, and his green eyes gleamed in the morning light. "I am Amaram," the speaker said. "I led the expedition. As I said, this," he indicated his body, "is a long story. The short version is we came into these mountains seeking a holy relic, and we found one. It changed us. We don't know how or why." "And you expect us to believe that?" Zephyrin had found his voice again. "Clearly this is the work of dark magic. You've been experimenting with brands in a way that violates our laws." Rael turned to Zephyrin. "They're clearly not demons, sir. Perhaps we should listen to what they have to say." "You shut your mouth, Sergeant. You're already pushing your luck here by speaking out of turn. Now get back in line before I—" "We're not demons." A new voice came from the shadow beings. A female. Rael felt his heart soar. He knew that voice. Turning, he found the speaker. Like the others, her skin was midnight black, and her eyes bore that same green light. She carried a pack on her back, and her clothing was different. But he knew that face. It was his wife, Carlona. At last he had found her. He was about to run to her when Zephyrin spoke again. "And I suppose you can prove that, can you?" "Just look at us," she answered. "We don't know what changed our bodies, but our minds are the same. Our wits are our own. If we were demons, how could we even have this conversation right now?" We do not know everything about demons. Perhaps there is some new combination of brands that produced something we've never seen before. But you obviously entered these mountains to experiment, to get away from civilization for your own taboo purposes." Rael couldn't keep silent anymore. "Carlona," he spoke. Her green eyes met his blue ones, and she smiled. There was a touch of sadness there, though. "Hello, love. Thank you for coming for me. I wish it was under different circumstances." The first shadow figure spoke up. "We'd like to discuss how we can come back with you. I know tensions are high right now, but if we could—" He broke off suddenly, and Rael tore his eyes away from his wife to look at the man, and his mouth fell open in horror. Protruding from the speaker's chest was a long arrow shaft, its feathered end still quivering from impact. As the figure fell to his knees, the murmuring around them turned to shouting. The other shadow people screamed and gave the wounded man a wide berth as he collapsed on the ground. Stunned, Rael whipped his head around to find the man who fired the shot. Zephyrin stood with the bow still in hand, anger in his face. "Our kingdom has one rule, one above all others. Magical heretics must be eliminated, lest they kill or corrupt our culture. We do not step beyond the bounds of our—" His sentence ended in a gurgle as a knife, thrown from one of the shadow people, embedded to the hilt in his throat. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Everyone watched as Zephyrin's eyes rolled back into his head, and he fell to the snow, red staining the white powder. Then everyone sprang into action. The Watchers formed a shield wall, their quick response based on years of practice. But some panicked and screamed at seeing Zephyrin's corpse. Some ran, others charged at the shadow figures. The newcomers were also in motion, many of them screaming and running as well. Rael watched it all, as if in a dream, barely comprehending how something could have escalated so quickly. 2 people lay dead, and it looked like more were about to follow. Not if Rael could help it. The lines of his brand burst into white light. They shone brighter than ever as Rael readied his magic. Soldiers stopped in their tracks. Those in the expedition froze in place as an invisible force held them. One by one, he brought them to their knees. But the magic was too much. As everyone pushed against his invisible barrier, he could feel his strength waning. Telekinesis granted the wearing incredible strength of mind, but it functioned much as it would if he were physically holding someone down. When his force met with greater force, he would break. He screamed with the effort. Thick darkness took the enclosure. Rael blinked. What was going on? Men and women among his band of Watchers cried out that they couldn't see. But not the expedition. Could it be that these people were somehow creating the darkness? He could still feel them with his magic, knew they were just as motionless as the others, but perhaps not as helpless. Veins protruded from his neck, and his face reddened as he pushed the shadow people further, flattening them to the ground and applying pressure. Inwardly, he winced, knowing that his wife was among them, but he couldn't pick and choose right now, not with this darkness surrounding him. Sure enough, his added pressure must have done something, for the darkness soon dissipated. Struggling lessened, and Rael could feel some relief as those caught in his telekinetic net held their peace. "Culdain," he gasped, "get everyone out of here. Take the band and get them to Foothold. Wait for me there." "What of you?" Culdain asked. Rael could see the hesitation in his face. "I'll be fine," he managed to say. The effort of using this much magic still beat down on him. Understanding lit Culdain's eyes, and he nodded. "Let's go, everyone. Fall out." Rael gratefully released the Watchers from his hold, but still put up an invisible wall of air, just in case one of them was stupid enough to charge him or the members of the expedition. No one did. They left in a hurry, sparing only a few glances behind. Once the last of the watchers could be seen disappearing down the mountain, Rael turned to the expedition, these shadow people. "I'm going to release you now," he said. "Please do not kill me." The shadowy figures got to their feet as the magic loosened its grip. None of them made any aggressive moves toward him. But one figure stepped forward. It was Carlona. "You always were the most powerful telekinetic I've ever seen," she said as she approached. He smiled at her, but the smile quickly turned to a frown. "What are we going to do?" It was the question that begged answering. He wanted nothing more than to take his wife home with him, to take all of them back and worry no more about it. But he knew that wasn't possible. Not now. Carlona must have understood as well. She hung her head, and Rael thought he could make out the smallest tear fall down her shadow-filled face. "I don't know, Rael," she said. It came out as a sob. "We knew you would be coming for us, and we thought we could talk some sense into Zephyrin, especially with you here. But now that he's dead, and Amaram is dead—" She indicated the fallen member of the expedition that Zephyrin had shot with his arrow. "I'm not sure what we're going to do." Rael felt his own eyes begin to water. "You can't come back. Not yet, at least." She nodded, but Rael saw motion from the others out of the corner of his eye. They weren't as content to stay away. "Listen to me," he said, louder so everyone could hear. "I know most of you probably didn't expect this. I know you want to get home to a soft bed and a hearty meal. I know many of you have families that miss you." He looked at Carlona as he said this, realizing just how hard this was going to be for everyone. "But you saw what happened here. Zephyrin was hardly an extremist among us. Many share his ideals, and it's written in the law. All those who pervert the use of magic must be punished." "We didn't misuse the magic," a voice came from behind Carlona. Rael recognized him as the young man who had thrown the knife at Zephyrin. He would need to step carefully around this one. "You know that, and I think I believe you, but most will not. If you come home, it won't be long before you, your family, and anyone who stands up for you will be taken away and butchered. This is my wife." He stepped forward and took Carlona's hands in his. "Believe me, I want this more than anyone. I want you to return. But we've just seen firsthand how that is likely to play out. We need more time." "What do you propose?" said Carlona. "Stay here," he said. "Rumor of this day will spread. Let me try to help those rumors, to help people know that you're not demons or misusers of magic." The younger man sniffed. "We killed one of them, and everyone saw it. Rumors won't do us any favors." "And whose fault is that, Vander?" Carlona said sharply over her shoulder. The young man Vander hung his head and said no more. "It's a long shot, but I think with time people might become accustomed to the idea. And if we can eradicate the real demons over the next few years, people will not fear you then." Carlona nodded. "Very well," she said. "We have discovered some extensive caves here. We can live there for now, until you return." Her eyes pleaded with him that he would return, and soon. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I can think of no other alternative." "You're right, of course. We were fools to even think you would accept us now." "If I may ask," he said, "how did this happen?" "We're still not sure. We came across a holy relic, a book, and we think it changed us somehow. We do not know why, and we still have not had the time to fully study the book to understand.
Perhaps later, I'll have answers for you.
Rael thought that through. A holy relic did this? He had never heard of a holy relic doing more than providing instructions on the use of branding, or having some form of branding power itself, like a staff that could shoot fire, or attract lightning. He had never heard of one physically changing a human. This could be dangerous information if it got into the wrong hands. He came out of his thoughts as Carlona began dismissing the expedition. Slowly they turned and began working their way back up the mountain. Carlona remained.
Rael, there's one more thing that I have to show you,
Carlona said, and began taking off the pack on her back. Rael leaned in close to get a better look. That was when he realized it wasn't a pack of supplies at all. It was a baby, a young child with dark hair, sleeping peacefully now, despite everything that had just happened. Carlona brought the child around and held it in her arms.
This is Jack, she said,
then spelled out the full name,
Jack Draconis.
Rael took a step back. That was his family name. What are you saying? He asked.
I wasn't sure when I left, so I didn't tell you. We almost came back from the expedition when it became clear that I was with child. If only we had, we might have avoided all of this. But I insisted we stay a little longer. We were so close to finding the holy relic. I could feel it, and I was sure that we'd return in time for the birth. But then the change happened, and I went into labor far earlier than I expected. Thankfully, she and I both lived through it.
She. A girl. Rael didn't know what to say. He stared down at his daughter, who wiggled her nose in her sleep. She didn't change, he said. Like you. She doesn't have all the... He didn't know how to finish that sentence. All the shadows?
No, and we don't know why that is either, Carlona responded. There is this.
She ran her hand through a small strand of the girl's red hair that contrasted with the black. That was unusual. So was black hair among their people. But the girl was still fully human.
Here, hold her,
Carlona said, and handed the baby to Rael. He took her gingerly and smiled in the moonlight. He had a daughter. Seeing her husband gently rocking the girl, Carlona smiled too and spoke further.
I want her to go with you.
Rael paused, but knew in that moment that it must happen. Part of him wanted it more than anything, but part of him also resisted. Shouldn't she be with her mother? Of the two of us, you could give her a better life.
You know I couldn't. I know being a watcher is not the best profession to raise a child on your own, but what would she have with me? She would know nothing about humankind, raised in the caves like a wild woman.
Then let me come with you. We can raise her together. But Carlona was shaking her head.
She needs civilization, and she needs to know her father. Hopefully this will all blow over soon, and I can come to you. But until then, she will be best raised in a place where she can have friends, and a father who loves her.
Rael gentle rocked his daughter up and down, the motion coming naturally to him. As he stared into that beautiful face, he accepted the truth. He had to be the one to raise Jack. Okay, he said at last. But we need to find a way to work this out. She can't grow up without a mother. Carlona nodded, but there were tears in her eyes.
I'm sure we'll find a way.
They spent the rest of the evening in each other's arms, cradling little Jack between them. For those precious moments, they were complete. A family. Sadly, the moment could not last. Eventually, it was time to leave. Rael proceeded down the mountain, carrying his newfound daughter in his arms. So much had happened in so short a time. When he ascended the mountain, he had been a simple man in search of his wife. Now he was a father, and his wife was something he couldn't explain. There was still so much that Rael didn't know, about magic, about people. But he did know one thing, that he loved this little girl with all his heart, and he was going to do all he could to ensure her safety. "I don't know what the boys are going to say about this," he said aloud, speaking to his sleeping child. "Watchers don't usually go into the mountains and come back with children." He laughed. "I can't wait to show you the fortress. You're going to like it. When you're on the tower, you can see for miles. They even say you can see Trade Hall on a clear day, though I think that's probably a bit too far." He continued speaking as they proceeded down the mountainside, following in the footsteps of the other watchers. The light of the moon guided him home. Culdain crept in the darkness, back up in the mountain. After leaving Rael with those fascinating creatures, he had led the band a day's march back to Foothold. But that was as far as he dared go. He needed to know more about what happened to Rael's wife and the others from that expedition. Leaving the band with another junior officer, he climbed his way back, quietly in the night. At one point, he had to hide as Rael passed by. The man was holding something in his arms, but Culdain could not get a good look. He'd have to inquire about that later. Once he was sure that Rael was far enough away not to hear him, Culdain began again. He hoped those shadow creatures were still around and wouldn't kill him on approach. But there was something driving him to find out more. He needed to know how they achieved those powers, that darkness that surrounded them, the way they seemed to blend into their environment. He needed to know. A few hours brought him to the small clearing where they had met the expedition. The bodies had been removed, and all that remained were a few red stains in the snow. It appeared these dark creatures bled the same as a man. A noise from the trees caused Culdain to spin in that direction. It was still dark. Even with the moon shining, he couldn't see past the tree line. But something was there. He could sense it. Another noise sounded from behind him, and another on his right. That was when he caught his first look at what stalked him. A demon emerged from the trees, on all fours, its beady eyes fixed on his face. Culdain drew his sword. He had prepared for this. Going off alone was sure to attract predators, but he had expected wolves, not demons. Quick glances behind him and to the side showed at least 5 other demons emerging from the shadows. This wasn't good. He knew he was a match for 1 demon, possibly 2 or 3. But 6? And why weren't they attacking him yet? All they did was circle around him, sizing him up. He had only seen 1 demon from the night before, but all that experience verified other accounts. Demons always attacked. They showed no conscious thought. But perhaps those reports were wrong. Culdain saw the first demon bare its teeth, looking disturbingly like a smile, as if it could sense his confusion. Culdain braced for the attack, holding his sword at the ready. Finally, the demons lunged at him, all at exactly the same time. He managed to cut one down before the rest barreled into him. Culdain braced himself for the pain. When none came, he kicked out. He was not going to die alone with no allies. But strong claws grabbed him and pinned him down. Why weren't their teeth tearing into him? What was going on? He struggled some more, but it was of no use. His sword lay motionless at his side. He could do nothing. Then a darkness surrounded him. He thought he knew what darkness was, but he knew nothing. This darkness cut him off from all light, all emotion, all hope. It was 100 times stronger than what the Shadow People had used on them hours earlier. This was something truly terrible. And Culdain found it absolutely fascinating. "Why have you come?" A voice sounded from all around him. It was a horrible, wonderful voice. Just the sound alone filled Culdain with ecstasy. "I came seeking the Shadow People we met earlier. I wanted to know their secrets." He did not lie. He could not lie to this force. "They are nothing. Their powers are weak. I can offer you something far greater." "What are you?" Culdain asked. "Are these demons?" "They are my children." "Are you going to make me like them?" Culdain found the demons fascinating, but he would never want to be one of those witless creatures. A pause. "That will depend on you, Culdain." Culdain must have looked surprised, for the voice continued. "Yes, I know your name. I know your thoughts. They are mine. Everything about you is now mine. But I will give you a choice. Become one of my children, or become something greater than you could ever imagine." Pinned down as he was, helpless, Culdain had little choice. Besides, he wanted to know more. Needed to know more. He made his choice. Agony coursed through his body, as did the ecstasy of the darkness. All the pain and pleasure that filled that powerful voice now filled his veins. The moon emerged from the clouds above, and Culdain could see again. Demons knelt on every side. They knelt to him. He laughed long and hard into the night as his body began to change. This is not the end. The story continues with Out of Shadow, Book 1 in the Roots of Creation series, by Jason Hamilton. You have been listening to A New Light, by Jason Hamilton, narrated by Henry Kramer. Copyright 2018 by Jason Hamilton. All rights reserved. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I want to thank you for listening to this audiobook. I hope you enjoyed it. Once again, I want to make sure I invite you to the VIP membership, the Knights of the Round Table membership, where you'll get all my ebooks and audiobooks for free when you sign up, as well as basically a chance to interact with me every week. We'll even be talking about what's going on in the world building of this thing. You could even participate in that and help with the ideas and everything to create this world. So definitely go check that membership out. I hope to see you there, and have a great day.